This is like the eighth take of this. Let's see if I can do it this time. I am not a videographer. I'm not a celebrity. I'm not an actress. I can't. I'm terrible at this. We're going to get it this time, right? Okay, Psalm 23, healing for your soul. Oh my goodness. Let's see what we can do here. Um, what do I want to say? Okay, the theme for today is He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. It's the importance of rest and restoration. The message translation is beautiful. It says, You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. How beautiful. Remember now that the concept of shepherding was not something that was exclusive to the Hebrew people. The Egyptians used it, the Babylonians used it. It was such a great metaphor for a leader leading the flocks, especially a great metaphor for our God. Um, I love it so much. I I want to understand the spirit that David had when he wrote this psalm. Everybody understood because they were shepherds. We like the psalm a lot. Everybody knows this psalm, but I think that we have lost a lot because we aren't shepherds and because we don't lead sheep. So we've lost some things, and that's what's so compelling for me about this psalm is I want to get the flavor and I want to get the full impact of what David meant when he wrote this beloved psalm for us. So, the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that the job of a shepherd was generally reserved for the youngest child in the family, whether it be a boy or a girl. There were girl shepherdesses as well as boy shepherds. David was the youngest, that was his job. Joseph was the youngest for a time, and that was his job. So let's look at some women who were shepherds. Let's look at Genesis 29, verses 9 through 12. Um, this is Jacob, and he had just arrived in Padan Aram. And while he was still talking with them, this is verse 9, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and waters his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel he was a relative of her father and son of Rebekah, so she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. And Laban said to him, You are my own flesh and blood. So, beautiful Rachel. She was a shepherdess. Let's look at another woman who was a shepherdess in, let's see, Exodus chapter 2, verses 15 through 21. And what's happened here is that Moses has just killed an Egyptian and he was seen. Uh, when Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Now, a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along to drive them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, Why have you returned so early today? They answered, An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock. And where is he? He asked his daughters. Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat. Moses agreed to stay with a man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. That worked out. So there were big stones on top of the wells, which were really super heavy. And sometimes it was very difficult for the women shepherdesses to move that stone, in which case it was really convenient that uh, not only Joseph, but Moses had come along to move the stone for the women. So shepherding was a dangerous job, whether you were a man or a woman. It was hot. It was cold. The weather was all over the place. There were animals to contend with. There were wild dogs, there were lions, there were bears, there were panthers, there were robbers. There was the heavy stones on the well that you had to move. There were other shepherds who were stealing sheep. There were bandits. It was a rough job. David was a shepherd, and we know that he killed a bear and he killed a lion while he was shepherding. Let's look at David as a shepherd. 1 Samuel. This is such a great story. 1 Samuel chapter 16. And remember, David was the youngest, so his job was to shepherd. And he did that until he was about 17 years old because there weren't any younger kids. He was it. So that was his job. Let's look at what happens here. Saul had screwed up and so needed a new king, right? So Samuel has to go find the new king. Let's read verses 1 through 13. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I've chosen one of his sons to be king." But Samuel said, "How can I go? Saul will hear about it and kill me." The Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived in Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "They're still the youngest," Jesse answered, "but he is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent and had him brought in. He was ruddy with a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. He is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. Samuel then went to Ramah. Youngest child tending the sheep. Let's keep looking at the Samuel story. 2 Samuel chapter 5. Let's look at another thing that was said about David when he becomes king over Israel. 2 Samuel chapter 5 verses 1 through 4. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, 'You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler.'" When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a compact with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years. It's our shepherd boy who became the most mighty king of Israel. So, the verse for today. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Let's look at some insights about shepherding. I learned that it was very common for the shepherd to let the sheep out of the sheepfold at about 4 a.m. So it's still dark, and the sheep are let out. It's cool, it's peaceful, um, and they begin to graze, and they walk along, and rarely do they are they still, but they walk along, and by 10 a.m. the sun is pretty high up in the sky. It's pretty hot, and the sheep are getting hot and they're getting thirsty. But to drink right after grazing will cause their stomachs to expand, and the gases can actually explode and kill the sheep. The shepherd knows this, so he has them lie down in green pastures to digest, to rest, to regroup. So let's take apart some words. I was really interested. He makes me lie down in green pastures. What does that word makes mean? So I looked it up in Hebrew, and the Hebrew is shavah, which means to level, to equalize, to reassemble, to adjust, to compare, to lie down, to make plain. So he reassembles me in the green pastures. He adjusts me, equalizes me, levels me as I lie down in this serene place. I become level. So it's for the sheep's own welfare that he has them lie down in these green pastures and be led by the still waters. so let's so let's pause for a second and consider this in our lives. And in the study group, I had people talk about times when the Lord has leveled you, where He has reassembled you, where He has readjusted you. We talked about hospital stays. I talked about the 3 trips I've taken personally to psychiatric hospitals when anxiety and depression issues overwhelmed me. It wasn't that I wanted to go, but I was made to go. It wasn't my choice. And each of those times, I was reassembled. I was leveled. I got great medical care, great mental health care, and everything was put back into not the way it was before, but in a new reassemblage. That was a time in my life where I was made to lie down in a green pasture. I didn't think it was a green pasture at the time, but it certainly was. And then the next part, he leads me beside still waters. And that word leads in Hebrew is nahag, which means to drive, to lead, panting under the influence or the effort. He drives me with effort to those waters that are still. The word still, menukah, which means quiet, still, calm, peaceful, at ease, at rest. And in doing so, my soul is restored, which is next week's verse.